Hey, it's Danny from Conscious Calisthenics here, back with another ex-vegan, so he can share his story because he found after being on a vegan diet for a long period of time, which he was on a vegan diet for around 5 years, and then went on to a vegetarian diet for around 5 years, and now he's been on a carnivore diet for around 3 months, and he started to really recover from the negative health impacts that he'd had on that diet. And he's actually a massive person in the raw food world and knows a lot of these high level raw food teachers out there. So yeah, thanks for joining us, man.
Awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, the first question I'd like to ask you is just so people can get a clear picture on your whole vegan journey. When you were vegan and then you went to vegetarian, what type of vegan and then vegetarian diet were you eating, and why did you actually make the choice actually in the first place to go vegan?
Okay, cool. Well, I've done every iteration and variation of the vegan, vegetarian, raw food diet. So most people that know me from that world, the raw food world, and in the plant-based world, through whatever means of education. I toured the country and spoke around the world on book tours and speaking tours and building a platform online, speaking about all these different things. So I'll answer the second question. I think that'll be easier to kind of lead us through this whole journey and everything. So I think it was about 2008, 2009, kind of somewhere in between there, that's when I really got into organic food. So I have been a martial artist my entire life since the age of 4, and I had a professional career in Taekwondo. I ran a martial arts school when I was very young, between 18 and 23. I was a 3rd degree black belt, and I was also Olympic hopeful for the U.S. national team in Taekwondo. I wasn't on the U.S. national team. I was training to make the U.S. national team, just to be clear. And so that was my life. I didn't come from any kind of health background other than being an elite athlete and a performer. And I had a knee injury when I was 18, which then I went through rehabilitation, corrective exercise. That's when I got more interested in health for athletic purposes. And then I had another knee injury, which led to another knee surgery when I was 22. And by that time, that's when I got really, really opened up to the idea of health. You get a little bit older. You don't feel as invincible as you once did. I definitely felt like I was totally invincible. I never had an injury that really sidelined me. I've had broken noses and fingers and toes and all that, but I could keep going, But this actually stopped me dead in my tracks. And then that's when I had to kind of mature a little bit and think about my life, think about my physical body and what am I going to do with my life if this career doesn't pan out? And so long story short, that's when I got really interested in health and nutrition. And, I went on YouTube University. And this is when YouTube was really getting going, all the health people. I came across people like Paul Chek, who's a mentor of mine now, and who's really into metabolic typing and more into ancestral type of diets, kind of like a modern day Weston Price type of approach. I would imagine something like that. And then I also stumbled on this thing called raw veganism. And I came across people like David Wolfe, who's a good friend of mine now, and was my original mentor back in those days. He kind of led the modern day raw food movement and what we know as the superfood movement and all that, the chocolate movement, the whole thing, that all came from him. And I have to say, those were some of the funnest times I've ever had, despite my transition now, which I really honor all of that. I just want to make that known because and I'm going to kind of circle back around to the timeline here. But one thing I want to share with people, this is not exactly the easiest thing to come out and break the ice about and come public about. I mean, I just did a podcast earlier with a good friend of mine. I think he has 2,000 views or something on the Facebook Live now. And it was the first time I really came out publicly the health community. And it was a great podcast, but it was I just have to be really honest right now because a lot of people, the thing, this, I've listened to your interview with Marcus Patrick, who I know, and that inspired me to reach out to you. This thing becomes a bit of an identity, this diet thing. And it can root itself very deep into one's own psyche, and especially if you develop a profession around it, you're speaking, you're in a tribal social community, and it's almost like an echo chamber, and you have this kind of social dynamic that's all reaffirming itself, and plus going around the country and speaking about this kind of thing, it has an interesting effect, right? So I just want to get present with that for everyone listening, and I don't consider myself to be an X anything. I know there's an exodus of people leaving the vegan movement, and just like the vegan label can be a label, the ex-vegan label, I'm noticing, can be a label too. And I'm not anti-vegan. I'm not really anti anything. I'm just pro health. I'm pro human potential. I'm pro like optimization. So I just want to put that out there for anyone listening, especially anyone that maybe knows me and stumbled across this video and might be challenged by this type of information. I just want to put that out there as we move through this. Yeah,
and I think that's such a very balanced perspective to have on the whole situation with what you're saying without the labels and the other various things, because a lot of people can just put themselves in a box, and a lot of people can say this thing's bad and this thing's good, and it's just like it's just going to have a negative impact on many different things. So thanks for sharing that part.
And I want people to be careful about trading one box for another. Right.
Oh, it's easy to do, and then you can get another box, and it's not working for you, and then you've got your identity built around it, and then you don't want to leave that, and it's a whole process you have to go through. It can be hard to leave, and I know from personal experience, so I can definitely relate to you.
Right. Okay, cool. So we got that out of the way. So what got me into it? Well, how did that start? Well, basically, again, I get it on YouTube. I'm looking at these videos, and I'm hearing about all these stories of people that are curing quote unquote incurable conditions. Like I didn't know that cancer was curable. I didn't know that diabetes was curable. My whole paradigm, I wasn't really deep into that world, but prior to getting into the health world, but I was just like anybody else. I had assumed that these things were, these were medical conditions, and that they were incurable. That's what I was told. So I'm hearing all these stories on people that have lost literally like 100, 200, 300 pounds in some cases of fat on juice cleansing. And I'm like, what? Like, wait a minute, green vegetable juice. And these people are literally like attesting to this saving their life. So you can just imagine, I'm sure, I imagine you can relate to that. It's like a complete 180, and it's an unavoidable consciousness shift. So, long story short, I just felt a resonance with it. There was a spiritual orientation. Marcus Patrick, actually, funny enough, was one of the people back then, because he was having his own, I remember he was coming onto the scene on YouTube and talking about kind of like the spiritual perspective, along with people like Dan the Life Regenerator, who is also a good friend of mine, and I mentioned David Wolfe and a few others. So this is how I'm getting introduced to it, and it was a completely different paradigm, and I really vibed with it. I was like, I don't know what everyone else is doing, but this seems like the missing key, because I've never done this before. This must be the thing. And so I just said, you know what, I need to run an experiment. And this is something I really want people to take in. Every diet is an experiment, right? Like, so for me, it was like, it wasn't about like, oh, I'm going to be vegan. Like, I didn't even know what a vegan was, to be honest with you. I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to feel amazing. I wanted to heal my knees, really. So I said, okay, what would happen if I went 100% raw vegan, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, green juices, smoothies? That seemed reasonable. That seemed like, natural. And so let me do that for 30 days. Let's see what happens. And I had quite an amazing experience. I actually healed my knees completely within 30 days. I found myself running up in the hills for 5 miles. And prior to that, I wasn't running for like 2 years or something because I was afraid of re-injuring my knees. And it was almost as if I forgot that I was in pain. And I forgot about the habituation to the pain that I had become accustomed to. And so that I felt so good. I ended up running these 5 miles. And when I came back, it dawned on me that, wait a minute, like what just happened? Like I'm not in pain. I'm actually completely free of pain. And that was a huge shift for me. And I decided to devote my life to the message of health and nutrition. And again, it wasn't about raw veganism. Raw veganism was the tool that was introduced to me, which entered into a spiritual path. It entered into a new dietary kind of lifestyle, and that's what started me out. That was about 10 years ago. I want to say too, the first year was it was amazing and could have killed me at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, can I ask you a question before you move further? So,
yeah.
Would you say you would attribute all of the health benefits and healing benefits you got just due to the raw vegan diet, or would you also attribute it to you just removed a lot of crap from your diet that was affecting you in a negative way as well?
That's a very good question. I definitely think it's a combination of both. I for sure think it's a combination of both. And also what's important to note is that at the same time, I got into grounding. I got into getting barefoot on the earth. And one of the things that happens with the raw food diet, at least in my case, is there's this naturalistic component, right? So I started to get connected to nature. I started to hang out in parks. I started to hang out under the sun, getting more sun on my skin. I started to connect more with nature itself, and I got out of the rubber sole shoe, which is basically like a cast on the foot. So it kind of has a way of throwing off the anatomical alignment in the bones of the foot. I read a book called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, which is basically about barefoot running. So I'm getting into all of this at the same time. So it's not just one thing. There were layers to this whole process. I definitely think the green vegetable juices was kind of like extinguishing some kind of inflammation, and I think it was just lightening the load, really, just like you said, kind of like releasing a lot of the junk from before. But all of these factors kind of combined, I think, is really it became a lifestyle. It wasn't really a diet. It was an overall lifestyle that I think made the difference.
Yeah, for sure. And your story sounds so similar to mine because I got into Dan the Life Regenerator, David Wolfe, and man, you're the most relatable story I could share of getting into it. So yeah, you said that it benefited you massively within the year of doing it, but it also could have killed you at the same time. So could you elaborate on that more?
Yeah, I never really talked about this before, but so this is a very, very important realization that I recently had looking back on the journey, as oftentimes wisdom starts to sneak up on us later on in life. And, so I was feeling really, really good. And I also didn't really know what I was doing. I was reading, so there was 3 books that I really got into. It was The Sun Food Diet by David Wolfe, which I still love. I think there's such a brilliantly written book. I mean, if not just for the inspiration itself in that book is amazing. But I got into that book. I got into Dr. Gabriel Cousens, Spiritual Nutrition, and John Robbins, A Diet for a New America, right? These are kind of like classic foundational vegan, vegetarian books and great messages, if nothing else, like really positive messages. And so I'm studying this, I'm learning about it, but I was more connected to the spiritual component, not so much the nutritional technical component yet, right? And so I'm basically just like I'm doing like this 80-10-10 variation kind of thing. I saw Douglas Graham, and which I don't recommend anybody follow, by the way, because I've seen what happened after a decade later, which is not the prettiest thing, but digressing from that, I got into that and almost had this like random approach. Like I just went to the market, got like pounds of fruit, pounds of vegetables, and I'm just throwing this stuff together. no real rhyme or reason. I'm still working out and running. And then eventually, a lot of people started to tell me that they were concerned about me. But, you know, I recently went vegan, so of course I know everything at this point, you know.
Yes, people did the same thing with me as well. Yeah, I thought the same thing. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, but when you go vegan, you all of a sudden know everything. So it's like, right? I have to poke fun at some of this stuff because any of us who have been through this, we know the signs and symptoms, the kind of psychological process, and so anyways, you know, I started to have the common, like the cheekbones were coming out, the skin got thin, a little bit of gaunty eyes, but I was getting really skinny. But here's the thing, I didn't know that.
Huh.
It took me a while looking back on this. I didn't really realize what was happening. I didn't have the scientific understanding I do now, but I felt really good. I was high energy. Like I really genuinely felt really good. One day I look in the mirror and I realized that I am extremely skinny, like really skinny. And I was like, my arms were like almost like not the extremes of like vegan deterioration. You see these videos which are just like, whoa. But like it was like it wasn't good, right? I'm even holding my arm and I'm like, man, I don't even know how it got that skinny, but it did. And that's when I decided that I needed to become a professional nutritionist. If I was going to do this, I needed to educate myself on nutrition, because up to that point, I just had to assume that this was the right path to go, but I didn't have a proper education on how to do this, you know. And I say that as a cautionary tale, and also my own experience, that's actually what pushed me into becoming a professional nutritionist and a holistic health, you know, educator, really. You know, but basically what ended up happening is something called gluconeogenesis, which is that and this is why I felt so good, I was running on adrenaline. Right? I was literally running on adrenaline. I was running on my own muscle tissue being converted into some kind of simple sugars for fuel, but my metabolism was kind of like inverting itself. But again, I didn't know that. And most people that are getting into this don't know that. And they certainly aren't told this because, you know, nobody really tells you that muscle wasting and sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting, is a phenomenon of malnourishment. But I was being told that I could live on a fruit-based diet. Nobody told me until David Wolfe actually told me, was that most of the fruit was domesticated, demineralized, excessively sugarized, very, very low minerals, and you know, hybridized. I didn't know what that meant until I got educated on it, and then I realized, oh, most of this fruit is actually not what I think it is. These tomatoes are in nature, like they're heirloom tomatoes, are very small little berries, not these huge ballooned out, like, you know, little balloon balls, right? And I realized, like, my whole food supply that I'm going to the grocery store or the farmer's market is more or less basically a domesticated, mineral deficient, you know, food supply, these fruits and vegetables. So that's when I started to get educated and start to learn about nutrition. I started to study different things from the plant-based world to more like Weston A. Price. And I got more balanced in my perspective. I believed in the raw vegan approach, but luckily I had enough of an open mind that, you know, one of the things I was thinking about today, I think you might appreciate this. I was walking and I was thinking about, you know, how some people say they're vegan doctors or they're vegan nutritionists. And I thought that's complete nonsense. You're either a doctor or not. You're either a nutritionist or not. And I thought to myself, you know, thinking about these interviews I'm going to do, like I became a nutritionist, which meant that what's the Hippocratic oath? You know, when someone becomes a doctor, for example, it's like, oh, I'm only going to talk about things that I agree with. Even if I don't necessarily, even if I don't eat meat, I need to understand if there's deficiencies in this diet, I need to understand that because I'm actually dealing with people in their health. So my duty and obligation as a healthcare provider, if you will, a health educator, is to know both sides. And that's always been my thing. So I think that's an important thing to say, because I've never really been a promoter of veganism. Although I was vegan for some time, I never really resonated with veganism because because of the cult aspect that came along with it, which I only later realized when I came across characters like Durian Rider and Freely. And I realized that there was some kind of strange psychopathy, some kind of strange psychopathic energy that was almost utilizing the movement as a way to weaponize this very distorted anti-human kind of energy and attack other people in the sake of, like, peace and love and light. And I was like, and for the animals, I was like, well, what about the human animal? Like, what's that about?
Yeah. Wow. I can definitely relate to that. And it's really good that you was able to keep your mind open to not just like the vegan aspects, even though you wasn't labeling it as veganism, but you're obviously doing raw veganism, but you're also open to many other things as well, because too many people put themselves in a box. So it's really good that you was able to not do that and keep your mind open to many different things. Even me as a health coach, I mentioned, like, even though I was vegan for years, I was getting most people to not be vegan because I saw that there was a lot of things that are healing that wasn't vegan foods.
That's really interesting.
Where did your health start to go downhill? Like, how did it progress over the next, like, the total of the 5 years of the raw veganism and then to vegetarianism?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. This is taking me through memory lane. This whole process has actually made me have to go back through the madness of the last 10 years and madness in good ways, because, this movement really introduced me to some of the most out-of-the-box thinking people in the world, and really shaped my perspective on things far outside of the box of diet, like different healing modalities and therapies and technologies, and regenerative farming and biodynamic farming. I mean, just David himself introduced me to concepts that I never would have understood if I never went into this. So I really honor the path. But since we're talking about it, and really trying to educate people that, hey, maybe you don't have to go through. Maybe you can do all the other stuff, but you don't have to go through the endless rabbit hole of confusion that maybe some of us did and happened to survive. But anyways, to answer your question, so I think I think it was just an up and down thing. I know for sure within the fifth year-ish, which is when I started to adopt more of a vegetarian approach and start incorporating things like ghee, butter. That's when the Weston A. Price information started to sink in on me. Because again, like I went through that information and, his studies going around the world, studying indigenous tribes and studying the dentition and the lack of cavitations and trying to understand why the American population was having all these dental issues and health issues. Obviously, we know through the introduction of processed food in the early 1900s, that's really what started all that. And also the minimization of organic animal foods. I didn't know that part then. I didn't think about that. But now that makes sense to me. I started to have digestive issues, and I started to have them primarily when I introduced cooked vegan food, which is interesting because some people have an opposite effect, right? The raw food actually worked really well for me because I have a constitution that's very fiery. I'm like a type A, ambitious, like full on type of character. So the juicing and the cooling aspect of vegetables and fruits and juicing and smoothies actually worked really, really well for me. So I felt really good on that for the most part. And I also think I had a lot of genetic reserves that I was able to ride on, right? Like that's another thing too, that a lot of people, when they feel really, really good, it's possible, I'm not going to say I know for anyone who knows anything, but it's possible that we're going through our genetic reserves, and some people have a different genetic and epigenetic kind of bank account,
Yeah.
right? Somehow people have a different vitamin B12 bank account and a heme iron bank account than other people. I think I just was gifted in some kind of way with maybe a stronger genetic disposition than a lot of other people that crash in 2 or 3 or 4 years. But I did notice when I started incorporating like grains like quinoa and different rices and stuff, that's when I actually had digestive issues. I think I encountered some kind of leaky gut issue. But the blessing in that was that it actually forced me to become an expert on digestive conditions to solve my own issue. And I did all kinds of stuff until I realized I had developed and this sounds funny, coming from the raw food world, but it is true at the time. I did develop a little bit of a cooked food addiction in that little window. But it was some kind of like, we can develop, food tendencies for all kinds of reasons, emotional, mental, there's all kinds of stuff for that. But it created kind of a situation where once I got off of those things, and we know through the agitation, the different compounds, the anti-nutrients and different things, especially in some of those grains in particular, are very agitating for the intestinal lining and digestive system. Most people have problems, especially when you for sure, but especially listening to some of these quote unquote ex-vegans and people that were vegan, but now they're doing carnivore and they have amazing digestive health. It's a very similar thing. So that happened to me. I got kind of back on track, but I started adding a little bit of animal fat in the form of ghee butter, sometimes Kerrygold butter, but it was mostly ghee butter that really did it for me. And for me, that was like, okay, cool. Like, I don't need to do this extreme exclusion of animal products. I don't really want to do meat or anything, but this ghee butter feels really, really resonant with my body. And it feels really correct for me on some kind of deeper level. I feel like I need to be connected to the animal kingdom. It makes sense to me that we're not just trying to get food from one kingdom. Like, there's multiple kingdoms of food. And there's also the mushroom kingdom, the fungi kingdom. I was really deep into medicinal mushrooms and the fungi kingdom. So that made sense to me. Like, okay, my nervous system is very similar to the mycelial network underneath the ground that the medicinal mushrooms or all fungi really communicate through this mycelial network in the soil, in the trees. We have something similar like that. So I was like, okay, cool, that makes sense to me. So this is really feeding my nervous system and my immune system. And then the animal foods are like, I need cholesterol. I know for sure as a nutritionist that this coconut oil may or may not be doing it for me, but I'm pretty sure it's not giving me all the cholesterol I need for my hormones. So the ghee, that's in the fat soluble nutrients. So the ghee came in and balanced that out for me. I just felt like, oh, it was like a little child, I was like, oh man, this just feels right, And
so when you say that, because you said earlier on you felt like you had a lot of energy on the raw veganism, but it was just a lot of adrenaline going on, possibly cortisol as well, I would imagine. So would you say that your nervous system was quite overstimulated? So once you started to eat like the ghee, for example, that you started to feel like a lot more calmer, a lot more relaxed, a lot less stimulated?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I can't really remember every moment of the journey. I don't want to make it as if like there was no benefit to the whole thing, or I was just riding on adrenaline. I wasn't a crazy person like some of these characters. Like, I'm a very normal, rational, kind of balanced type of person. That's my martial arts training, but I'm also very high energy at the same time. I think it was a combination of just the freedom of just kind of life force energy waking up, consciousness itself in my body waking up, and the positive side of the detox process, more oxygen in my cells. Definitely I got into spring water early on. So I think that was a huge factor in my health, was just hydration. Just getting properly hydrated. I think living spring water for me was actually one of the biggest things, and that's one of the things I'm non-negotiable about is my water quality. I am like religious about water. If there's anything I'm neurotic about, it's my water. Yeah, and yeah. So, but anyways, Yeah, to your point, yes. When I had the ghee and I started incorporating that, it definitely balanced out the nervous system, and that's also when I got really deep into hormone research, and really started to get educated on all the endocrinology and testosterone and estrogen, and started understanding this topic of phytoestrogens and xenoestrogens in our environment, and the plant estrogens that come in plants. So certain things like soy and other plants that are a little more feminine in nature, which a lot of women have more of a preference for, essential oils and different things like this. But they can, if they accumulate too much in the body, can develop a little bit too many of these phytoestrogens and can be a little problematic. Soy for sure is just like one of the worst things ever by far. I think most people probably agree with that, except the people that are doing it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And was there any other issues or imbalances that you found that you had before you started incorporating some animal foods, and then obviously inevitably you ended up on like a modified carnivore diet, which we'll talk about in a short while. Apart from like feeling a bit overstimulated, running into sarcopenia, was there anything else? Did you have any issues with cognitive function, mental health, or anything else?
This is bringing me back. So I'm going to speed this up to the reintroduction of meat, because I think that's the most important thing to move into. But I will say I had bouts of excessive stress in my life, whether that was just life itself or is my inability to buffer stress. And I think this is a real issue. I've studied mood disorders, and I definitely think there is more of a propensity for mood imbalances among, I'm not going to say all vegans. I know some people that are long-term vegans and they don't have those same kind of issues. They're very well balanced, but as we know, just being on the internet, there's a lot of people that aren't. And I know from my own experience, I've gone through bouts of existential crisis. I've gone through bouts of depression. I've gone through bouts of neurotransmitter imbalances, and I've done everything under the sun to work that out. And when I reintroduced meat into my diet, which was about 3.5 months ago or so, all of that started to normalize. It doesn't mean that I didn't have stress, but I noticed my physiological and emotional response to stress was just very different. It wasn't this whole drama. You know what I mean? Like there's like before there was this whole dramatic thing, and one of the things I noticed, and I don't know if this was to do with veganism or is to do with being around spiritual communities for too long, but there was like always a spiritualizing of the feeling, like, oh, this is an ascension symptom, or like this is and I mean that can take you for a ride too, because I mean, that whole community is very deeply entrained in a lot of these concepts. And I'm not saying they're not without validity, but sometimes a mood disorder is just a mood disorder. Sometimes depression is just depression. It's not like you don't want to color it or just call it something else. It's like, no, we need to look at your mineral levels. We need to do a mineral hair analysis. We need to look at your amino acids. We need to actually look at your biochemistry and see if you have a nutrient deficiency, because that could and most likely is actually the issue, especially if that issue wasn't there before. And for me, that issue was not there before. I was a high performance athlete. The level of stress that I took on was normal. So all of a sudden, years later into all this, I'm having a lot of these existential concerns, if you will, and just these emotional fluctuations. And I did a lot of experimenting, and I think that for me, compared to most people, after I hear their stories, especially the ex-vegan stories, I think that I was able to, I don't know if I would say thrive, but comparatively speaking, I say that I was able to thrive longer than most people. But what I realized, and I'm gonna speed up to the next phase of the thing here, the story here. What I realized, and this is what allowed me to open my mind and finally like conduct a new experiment, which was eating meat again, which was I realized, okay, I feel like I'm doing really, really good compared to most people, whether they're eating meat or not. And I've been a high performer my entire life. So that's just who I am. So is that just my psychological kind of disposition to outperform people, to kind of go above and beyond? Do I just have an ability to do that? Is that really the best indicator of optimal health? Because I knew there were certain things that just weren't, in David's words, the best ever. There were certain things that I didn't want to dig my head in the sand about anymore. It's like, okay, there's certain things that are creeping up, whether that's like adrenal issues, kidney sleep imbalances, not feeling totally great all the time. I need to address this, and I need to do something different, because within the model of plant only, even with ghee and a little bit of pescetarianism on and off, this isn't doing it. And I had to be honest with myself. So I decided that after a few friends of mine, one of them, Dr. Robert Cassar, I don't know, do you know Dr. Robert Cassar?
Yeah.
Okay. So he texts me every day. We've known each other for like 10 years, right? And he's texting me every day. The carnivore thing, I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't even understand it. I was like, okay, I understand meat. Like I get that it's probably good, right? But all meat diet, that I didn't even want anything to do with it. Don't even talk to me about this thing. But finally, he puts out all these new videos, and he's 8 or 9 months into his own experiment. He's talking about how this diet healed him. He's literally speaking to me. He's like, this healed things inside of me that were creeping up on me after 15 years of vegetarianism. And I respect him, in the top echelons of like health experts in the world. And that was the moment I was like, okay, this is the moment of truth. This is it. Like, we need to run an experiment. So I started studying like Paul Saladino and Sean Baker and Robert, listen to Robert. And then finally, here's the kicker. You ready for it? This is the ultimate like DMT truth moment, where I sit down literally to my first grass-fed, grass-finished steak in my life. Now, not just in 10 years, but I've never had an actual grass, you know what I mean? I've never had that. So I sit down, I eat it, and a number of things happened. I had a niacin flush. So I had blood flushing through my arms, like just racing through my arms. I was like, whoa! And I was like, this feels like a niacin flush. What's going on? And I felt like my red blood cells were literally reoxygenating themselves, rebuilding themselves. I'm like, whoa! And
wow.
And I was like, okay, this feels good. But I was texting Robert, like, dude, like, what's going on, man? And he's like, red meat's full of vitamin B3, but full of niacin. I was like, oh, okay, got it. Feeling like a white belt again. Like, okay, this is a new experience. Because again, I was like a quote unquote expert before. I was a black belt at the plant-based thing. So now I'm like not like ignorant, but I'm kind of like starting over in a sense. So it's a whole new experience.
Yeah.
My physiology starts turning on, and then my brain grew. I had a what's called neurogenesis. I had literally a vibration within my brain, and I knew, I was like, this is neurogenesis. This is my brain actually like regenerate, like neurons regenerating. It was like zzz, and I had to grab the table like, okay, it's like really full on.
Yeah, it's like your brain was just being given what it needed, and it was just like fully bringing it full on to life. And I can relate to that. I felt that it was going to my brain now. So it's interesting to hear you say.
You had the same thing happen
to
you.
Yeah, I could just feel that it was going to my brain and feeding my brain and other parts of my organs and just giving it exactly what had been lacking for so long. It sounds a very similar experience to yours.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And then that was an interesting moment, right? Because on one level, from a health perspective, I was very happy. I felt like, yes, I figured out what my body needed. But on the other level, it was like, shit, this worked. Because there was a part of me that was kind of hoping it didn't work, but that was a very small part of me at the time. It wasn't hard to move through that. And I think you'll appreciate this too. And I hope your listeners do. There was another side effect that I had that wasn't physical. It was psychological. It was almost like I had a DMT trip, like a very quick DMT trip where there was a box. There was like a proverbial 3D box, and it just fell apart, like around my head. It was like, and all of a sudden, it was like my consciousness freed up, and I felt the vegan goggles fall off.
Oh wow!
Dude, this was like a shamanic experience. And then I started going on to check this out. I started looking at like Bobby's perspective. I just stumbled on all these characters. I know Bobby's perspective. Who's this guy? But not only was he incredibly entertaining, I actually could see what I couldn't see before. I was looking at, and I felt like I went through a lot of emotional, like looking at like Vegan Deterioration YouTube channel and people I actually know. And I'm looking at it and I'm holding my heart. I was like, oh my God, like I didn't see this. I didn't see the accelerated aging, the subtle signs of degeneration or malnourishment, or these weird personality constructs, or like, one of those videos where, it's kind of making fun of all these girls that are hyping up every single food. They're like, oh my God, like that. And I started to see all this. And it really was like, I felt a wave of emotion. There was no judgment. I for some reason, I couldn't see the problem in the community because I had separated myself from the online vegan popularity contest, right? That's what I call it.
Yeah, for sure.
But all of a sudden, I was seeing it. That's what I mean. Like the goggles fell off. The scales on my eye fell off.
Yeah, it was like it gave you a complete paradigm shift, and it's like you're just seeing stuff that was always there, but you just hadn't seen it before. So it's so amazing that experience of the state gave you such a profound spiritual, enlightening, awakening experience.
Dude, that's yes. It was there was the physical aspect of it, right? And I think that's what most people focus on. What the paradox of this is, getting into the raw vegan movement gave me an amazing spiritual awakening, and I've gone through medicine ceremonies, ayahuasca, many different shamanic ceremonies, fasting, cleansing. I've had many different milestones through that journey, but then leaving it, transitioning from it, was a spiritual awakening in of itself. Go figure.
Wow, that is really, really profound. That's really good for people to hear as well. Because like you said, a lot of people just focus on the physical. They don't experience sort of spiritual things, which I did as well. Wow. So yeah, and that's so amazing to hear that. Yeah, it just shifted your paradigm so well, and it woke you up to the reality. Like, that's a really good thing that you mentioned. So many people are not aware of what is going on with them, that they're not thriving, and that there is like sarcopenia going on and many other things. And they're just so blind. It's just because they're just so ingrained with so much dogma. And it can form like obviously orthorexia, and some people anorexia, and many other different eating disorders, and a body dysmorphia. So yeah, it's really good.
Oh yeah, dude. That what you're just is describing, like orthorexia, like that's something I got introduced to early on when I got into like because I studied the history of like veganism. Just for anyone who doesn't know, was created in 1944 by a name like Don Watson, right? That's where the term veganism was created. Have there been people that have practiced vegetarianism, or I would say periodic vegetarianism, most likely? As you know how they like to do it. Oh, if you're a vegetarian for a week, it's like, oh, he was a vegetarian, Sir Isaac Newton or Rudolf Steiner, or it's like, well, okay, I mean, unless they were promoting it, you don't really, Albert Einstein, like, yeah, I know the quote, the whole thing, like, but we don't really know. But it's like like with the athletes, Tim Sheaf talked about this whole thing, right? Like, if you become an athlete as a vegan and you go into veganism, but you built your body before veganism, but then you go into it, they're like, oh, he's a vegan athlete. But is that really true? Is
Yeah.
that no? It's just like cherry picking these epidemiological studies that and like, oh, see, it's that. No, that's not even scientific. Like because you got your blinders on, and you're not willing to look at this whole vast amount of information. Um, and that's what I mean. Just going back to this whole thing of like, is somebody a doctor or are they a vegan doctor? Because that's a conflict of interest. Because as we know, one size does not fit all. And I'm sure,
Yeah.
even the same thing with all the paleo diets and keto and carnivore. Like my carnivore journey right now, it's a modified carnivore journey, but my carnivore journey is to rehab myself. I'm not going to take on any other title or play out any other meme. I'm a human being having a human experience, trying to find out what it means to be a fully optimal human being, connected to my ancestral roots, connected to my genetics. That's my journey right now. And I happen to be doing a particular eating pattern, refeeding my animal body, rebuilding my nervous system, and a primarily animal-based approach appears to be the way to rehab and to heal myself from, not having any of that for so long.
Yeah, exactly that. And did you get any other benefits from when you first tried the steak? And if you didn't, or if you did, once you explained that,
Any other
yeah,
benefits?
yeah, did you get any other benefits from when you ate your first bit of meat? And then what other benefits did you get from consistently eating animal foods up until this point?
I mean, okay, so I got two things that come to mind. One thing, which is like is like TMI, too much information, but I'm going to mention it because it's super important, especially for men. And Robert Cassar hinted at this because I started consulting. He's like, okay, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And he talked about how his testicles actually enlarged. And
Huh.
well, I can tell you, you know the difference between a chicken egg and a duck egg?
Yeah,
that's the appropriate metaphor, right?
Wow, so you had a complete, a complete anatomical change where you could actually see it, which is like, that's a clear sign you were low in testosterone, like for sure.
Yeah, for sure, right? And I'm, again, like one of the other things that I have an expertise in is herbology. So I know all the different testosterogenic and different types of herbs. And I actually think that those herbs, I think that's one of the reasons I was able to thrive. The pine pollen, the Tongkat Ali, the tribulus, the mucuna. Like if I didn't have the herbalism and the extra nutrients of the, quote unquote superfoods, there are, like I also was on permaculture farms. I lived in Hawaii for many years. So I actually like cacao. When I say cacao, I'm not talking about cacao powder. I'm talking about growing cacao. I'm talking about the actual pod and the beans and making like that, wild coconuts. That was like, if somebody wants to be a raw vegan, like Costa Rica or Hawaii is like your best bet. Like if you want to pull that thing off, then I would say like, okay, if that's in your heart, then get out of the city. Get out of the city because that food supply is gonna rob you. Get over to some kind of tropical area where there's wild coconuts and wild food, and real soil, and then see how you do. But anyways, so I was doing that. I think that was my saving grace, to be honest with you. I think that's.
Yeah, it's the same with Marcus. It's very similar, and I was very similar as well. It's just like you either go down the supplementation route or the herbal route, or you're getting like organic produce, or you're just taking this thing and that thing and that thing. And that's why someone like yourself and also me managed to last longer than many people. But still, inevitably with those things, just like for you, it didn't make you get to the point where you were thriving in every way possible. It sounds like until you started eating these animal foods.
I didn't have physical building blocks. I had chemical messengers. So like a pine pollen, for example, has bioidentical testosterone. It's a chemical messenger. But I also needed building blocks, raw material to build my physical body. I'm not going to do that on lettuce and celery juice. Like that's good for, the pipes and the arteries. That's all good. It's got, minerals and all. That's fine. but I need to build this physical vehicle out of something, right? And so, like, the fascia can get dehydrated, or, the connective tissue that holds together the connective tissue and the
Yeah.
muscles and the joints. A lot of people have joint issues. I never really had a lot of joint issues, but I was also doing fermented amino acids. I was doing different things. So yeah, anyways, that was really supportive. But to your point, I just want to acknowledge, like, yeah, you're 100% right. Like I'm noticing I'm having to backtrack through my own thought process. This is almost like a cathartic moment right here, because like, I hadn't thought about some of these things until having this dialogue. Like, but that's basically what was happening. It was like I'm signaling a lot of my chemistry, so I'm able to kind of ride on that, but I'm not rebuilding the actual foundation. It's like I cleaned out the foundation through cleansing, but you got to build back, right? So there's like short-term healing and therapeutic approaches. There's the catabolism, breaking down the house, the candida, like the mold in the walls, and you got to break down all that and get onto a even keel. But then what do? You just get cleanse. No, I got to rebuild the structure, the insulation for the nerves, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the animal products were. Now, your question, I haven't forgotten about that. So there was the testosterone effect through the sexual glands, unavoidable. Undeniable, right? Undeniable. Now, here's the other thing that was really interesting in combination to that. I was lifting a lot of weights at the time, and given a plant-based diet, I was doing really good. Again, with all these other things supporting myself. I also do a lot of breath work, I have a whole lifestyle, like cold showers, all of it. So, there's a whole thing there. But I'll tell you, dude, when I started adding meat back into my diet, I was working out twice a day, lifting weights on the same areas of my body twice a day. Wow. Like this is totally unadvised, like, bodybuilding advice. They didn't tell you never ever do this, but I starting to feel so good, and I'm pushing harder than I was before, and I'm just like okay, like, I'm just like, let's test this thing now. Like, clearly there's more gas in the muscular fuel, there's more gas in the myocells and the muscles. I'm just like, okay, let's go. And I could push more. The next day I would do different exercises, but all the same muscle groups. I wasn't sore at all. Wow. And I could push just as hard. And then I did the same thing with my legs, and I'm like, not only am I not getting sore, but I'm able to keep doing this. And eventually I had a rest day. But my point is that I was able to, like, almost right the next day, almost right away, I was able to go into a completely different anabolic state, almost like a superhuman anabolic state, which is...
Yes, it's really enhanced your sports performance and sports recovery, which, that is just like so profound that he's able to do that much more and then able to train the next day. And it sounds very similar to people that end up getting synthetic hormone replacement therapy that are older. It sounds like a very similar thing, but obviously you getting the cholesterol, which is the building block for all the other hormones, rather than, like you said, taking certain things like pine pollen, which is giving you certain things, but then it's lacking all the other building blocks. Yeah,
and so basically what I was doing is bioidentical hormones, right? Like, I was doing biologically identical organic hormone. I don't know if you call it replacement or precursor therapy.
Precursor, yeah,
precursor therapy, right? But so that's a good analogy, because it was like what you would think when you get HRV or HRT, but without the synthetic injections and all that.
Yeah.
It was just like, no, you just needed, like, grass-fed bison.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so easy, and it's more cost effective and healthier for you. Wow. Yeah. So was there any other benefit? Yeah. What other benefits did you start to notice over a period?
I'll tell you another benefit too, and this isn't like health related, but it is kind of like psychic space related. Meaning, I cleared up some psychic space around the one issue that I could not get my head around, which was the ecological, environmental issue that is associated with a plant-based diet versus an animal-based diet, right? This is one of my driving messages that I'm trying to get across, because I find that the arguments that are made for veganism are oftentimes I mentioned earlier this thing around anti-humanism. And this isn't a joke, right? Like this is actually very serious. Like most of the plant-based foods that people jump on board, and I mean like people, normal people that just hear that plant-based is the answer, so they go and get these like synthetic nut milks. They go and get these processed vegan foods. They've been corporatized, and it's political. It's
Yeah.
political. It's politicized. It's corporatized, and there's this war waged against real farmers. And then it's like, oh, Nestle, they have they have a vegan ice cream. Oh, Taco Bell, let's get the bean burrito. It's like, no, 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 hold on. These corporations these are not corporations to be voting for your dollar or to be supporting. And that's what I mean, the vegan goggles. It's
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, guys, hold on. If you really are for the environment, if you're for the animals, you're for ecology and the sustainability of our world, then we need to think a little bit deeper here, because we've been doing farming and regenerative agriculture and animal husbandry, working with animals for a long time, right? And this new industrialized kind of food model is a recent invention. Just like I pointed out, veganism, 1944, that's pretty recent. And yet people are acting as if this is going to be the thing that is going to take us into the future. But the reality, as I'm sure you know, and many of us find out as we actually educate ourselves on this, is that veganism doesn't show up in nature. It definitely doesn't show up in biodynamic farming. It doesn't show up in really organic farming. There is veganic farming, but I don't know anyone who's doing it successfully, using spirulina instead of cow manure. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you can look, there's a million different ways you can create the concept in your head, like, oh, we could do this and this, but why? That's my question. Why are we trying so hard to go against nature with this weird model, which is like, okay, just free all the domesticated ruminant farm animals because we don't want to contribute to violence and cruelty. Do you know what's going to happen when you release them to the wild? They are going to be subjected to the most insane cruelty and violent death by predation of carnivorous animals in the wild. That, Joe Rogan made this point. I thought, like, okay, I didn't, when I was vegan, I heard him talk about it. I was like, you know what, Joe, that's a damn good point. That there is a reason that farming is actually very appropriate. And, this whole idea of monocropping, right? Monocrop plant agriculture, where most of the plant foods that people are getting go to, their local grocery stores and supermarkets. They're like, oh, this is so natural. It's like, this is the cruelty lifestyle. But if you realize what has to happen to line up these rows and bouquets of domesticated, excessively grown lettuce and carrots and all these things, these plants, and you have all these herbivore animals like rabbits and deers and insects and all these, the natural biodiversity and the soil, and they're literally being killed. The rabbits, I mean, they're being intentionally killed by the hundreds, if not thousands, thrown into a hole, not even eaten, and they're being killed to protect the crops so they can sell those to
Yeah.
grocery stores or restaurants so people can have their vegan meals. They can have their salads, their fork over knives. Jeez.
So that's really good points. It's like it's amazing. So you started getting spiritual benefits, a paradigm shift, like physical health benefits, mental, cognitive benefits. Like you just started to wake up to a lot of the reality around the vegan foods. And something I'll just add on to that for a statistic
Yeah,
for anyone
please
who
go
know.
for it.
Around 23 million animals are killed a year in America for pest control for the agriculture industry. 23 million a year. which is like massive. So that's a really good thing, yeah, that you just mentioned about that. People think that the vegan diet is a cruelty-free diet. Well, no, not when it comes to monocrops. I'm very aware, so keep talking to people about this. It's like a very important thing to be aware of. So thank you for sharing that part with us. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I mean, I kind of had a hint of this. All I knew was domesticated plant foods were weak, and if and you are what you eat, right? So if I'm going to eat seedless bananas or seedless watermelons, then I'm going to become seedless.
Yes.
So at least I got into this understanding about wild food and going for where the minerals were, and I knew that, right? But I didn't. It took me a long time to get that piece, and once I got that, and particularly through including animal food, because once you cross the line, it's like, shit, okay, well, there's no really going back. So I have to go all in on this. That's why I'm doing these interviews. That's why I'm speaking about this, because I can't be half in, half out. I got to be all in on this now. And that's why I decided to look at information that maybe I might have turned a blind eye to, or I didn't have all the facts, or I wanted to just assume on some level that this is okay. Like I go get my salad and I get my thing, and the animal section, like that's some kind of atrocity over there, and I don't look at it, even though it's staring me every time I go into the grocery store. There's one point I want to make though that I think is really important about all this. I know I'm kind of riffing and ranting a little bit. This is fun, but there is one important point that I want to get across, because I do understand the conflict, right? I do understand the dilemma. When I started eating meat again, it was a process. Like health-wise, my body responded very quickly, but there were times where I sat down and I felt kind of like, am I doing this? Am I really doing this? And then I would do it, and I would acclimate, and every day it was kind of a new experience, and I could talk about that, but the one thing I want to say is that this idea that you can't have animal products without violence and cruelty is absolutely it's just incorrect. But we do have to acknowledge that there is a huge segment of animal agriculture that is basically like a Holocaust, right? It's the Holocaust diet. It's and this is where this is why I say I'm not anti-vegan or anything. I think we're all brothers and sisters. I think we're all part of a humanity, and we're all trying to go in the same direction. But I think all of us really got confused along the way, and we're trying to figure out what is the most harmonious, conscious, and ethical way forward. And just because this last thing I just want to say, just because an animal dies does not mean that it suffered, and it doesn't mean that it lived a cruel life. Just because there's an entire industry that is born out of some kind of nightmare that has like some kind of wounded human thing where they want to beat up animals and torture animals, and that's some kind of nightmarish part of our human reality that's taking place in all areas of our system. We're seeing it right now with this whole COVID charade and in the political system, where some people are one step away from demons, like Bill Gates. It's like that does exist. That demon realm does exist, and it does exist in that particular segment. But let's not confuse that with saying that all animal products are born out of some form of like slavery or violence or cruelty, when the reality is these animals are loved up so much by their farmers. These small scale farms, they love their animals just like you or I love our animals. This idea that like, oh, I'm vegan now, that means I'm an animal lover, and so if I'm not vegan, that means I don't love animals. It's like, come on, guys, let's get back to reality.
Yeah, for sure, and that's a very good point for you to share, people. And it's like, so would you say so obviously you're talking about like factory farms, the Holocaust,
that's exactly
like the worst, and then like pasture-raised animals, which treats animals way more. It's the most ethical source meats. So would you say that you definitely had to go through an emotional process with eating the animal foods, and then you started to re-educate yourself on not what the vegans show you, with things like the vegan documentaries like Cowspiracy and that show the animals treated the worst and so on. Yeah, was that a whole process for you?
I mean, kind of just what I've been riffing and ranting on. You brought up something. I just want to say this. I've never seen a vegan documentary that was honest. I really like after the Game Changers, like I was really like into it, but it was more for the filmmaking quality versus the actual facts. And when I actually got down to the facts, I was like, they're completely inflating this entire thing, and it's actually just more show than anything.
Yeah.
And that was a thing where that actually bugs me about the whole thing. Is like, why are we lying? Like, why are all these people on YouTube lying to people? Or maybe they're not genuinely lying. They truly, like, I know how it is. You're in it. That stuff is rooted in your mindset. You're getting these advice from these sickly vegan doctors, and you're putting, it's like, but at some point, at some point, you have to, like, call a spade and be like, you know what? This doesn't look logical. They're parroting the same thing. If I keep doing this, I'm going to look like that or worse. You know, it's just this regurgitating kind of narrative. And it's one of the things that irks me about the community, because I really love the ethics and the kind of ethos and you know, animals, you know, sanctity and all that kind of thing. I really believe in that. But, you know, the vegan community at large makes it very hard to A, take it seriously, and B, to really support anything that's coming out of it, because, you know, a lot of people just realize, especially more scientifically inclined people, you realize that a lot of this information is not based on anything real. It's not based on facts. It might be based on someone's experience, and that's valid. I can't debunk someone's experience. But I find that a lot of people are exaggerating, or they have temporary moments of maybe peak highs like I did at different points, but they're not telling the whole truth, and I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, for sure. And then it comes alongside, like you said earlier, on very flawed epidemiological studies, which are
Right.
rife through the vegan community. But people just say, oh, look at this one and this one and this one, but they don't understand science. They don't break it apart and realize that it's very, very flawed. So yeah, it's so good that you managed to, through the whole experience, just have a very balanced transition and awakening with everything. And actually, would you say that veganism really helped you to become conscious around food, and that was how you managed to become conscious around your animal food choices as well?
Yeah, 100%. I 100% believe that. Yeah, it was a beautiful and necessary pathway. And I think that's what it is for most people. And that's why it's so understandable why we go so deep into it. You know, it feels like the most natural thing, especially in the beginning, you know, whether it's the idea of it or it's how you feel in the beginning. And you know, you can ride that out for a long time, especially if you do it in an intelligent way. But ultimately, it does have a full circle moment, just like everything in life does. There's life and death. There's a full circle to everything. And I think there's a lot of people that are afraid of the full circle. They're afraid of the completion of nature's, you know, pattern, which is life and death ultimately. And for me, it's just an ego death. It's just being reborn. It's being reborn into another iteration of who Ronnie Landis is, not as a nutritionist or a health person. Yeah, that was a bit of a shift. You better believe it. It was like, okay, what am I going to do now? You know. But then, you know, here's the other beautiful thing too. I realized that just because I'm doing a modified carnivore diet, that doesn't mean that I'm throwing out everything else either. Like at some point, there's going to be an integration of the extremes. Right? Like I needed the extreme on the vegan and raw food side to clean everything out, to clear things out, and to detox and all that. And I need this to rebuild and recover. At some point, I'm going to come back into equilibrium. There's going to be some kind of hybrid approach of an intelligently kind of built-in, high-quality plant and animal approach. Because I do believe we are designed. There is an animal part of us, there's the mycelial part of us, and there is a plant part of us too. Rudolf Steiner talks about this. If you think about a leaf, it's like a solar panel for UV radiation, right? It's soaking up all the sun rays and turning it into chlorophyll. Well, we have a similar process. We don't do the chlorophyll thing, but we have a similar process with vitamin D3 hitting our cholesterol and transforming that into hormones and probably a million other different things. So we absorb the sun similar to a plant in a way. Like when we root into the ground, like get barefoot on the ground, we're kind of enacting a plant-like behavior, if that makes sense. Like so what I'm saying is, from a naturalistic perspective, it's kind of like putting all the pieces together of what the optimal natural human dietary I don't know, eating pattern might look like. And I don't know, because I'm not trying to create my own thing out of it either. Like, oh, I now I got this whole thing. I'm just trying to approximate a little bit closer to what it would be a natural human in an unnatural world.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds that you're really going about it in a way where you're just listening to your own body and what's working for you. So this is why you're doing what you're doing now. Right. In a moment, I'll ask you a few other different questions. But yeah, before I move on to the other questions, were there any other significant benefits that you started to notice during this whole change?
Yeah, man, you're really good. You're really just digging in there. I definitely think there was a social benefit. And not that I had any social issues before, because I never judge people and that whole thing. It's food. I don't have a big deal about it. When I was plant-based, but I just kind of like stopped thinking about food. Like that's the best I can say. I just stopped thinking about food. Like the obsession over it, the thinking about making food. What am I going to eat next? Like, what are we going to do? We're going to bring food somewhere, and this whole thing. Like, I actually just don't think about food very much.
Wow.
It's that, that freed up a lot of space.
Yeah, for sure it does. And then you can focus more upon other things that are more important rather than food.
I make my food, I eat it, I feel nourished, I move on, and it's like, it's done.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, for sure. I can relate to that. And did you notice any changes with like your skin, your hair, your nails, or anything like that? Teeth?
I'm still on the journey. I'm still, I'm still in the, it's still early in the rehab process, the recovery process. I don't notice any significant changes yet in hair, although I can feel like the follicles and the blood circulation is probably kicking in a little bit more. I can't tell you that there's any significant results yet. I have a sense that there will be. I never had teeth problems before because I always had a focus on minerals. And so I think I was fine there, but maybe like the vitamin K2 or the fat soluble nutrients, my teeth feel fine. I mean the neuromuscular effect. Okay, here's one for you. Yeah, this is kicking in. Nervous system balance, neuromuscular. What's the word I'm looking for? Composure.
Yeah.
Like there's not this like, just sometimes there would be a little bit of a flightiness, kind of just like a little, little like muscle here and there, maybe a little bit of a spasm randomly. These are just kind of fluke, kind of weird things. I don't really have that anymore. Like I'm just more kind of centered and grounded in my nervous system. My muscles feel more relaxed. And I feel more of a primordial energy. And what I mean by that is like a kidney adrenal energy. So in Chinese medicine, they'd say like that's your jing. That's like your bank account, right? That's like this life force energy that's stored in the kidneys. It's like your willpower. I feel not like I have more or less willpower. I just feel a deeper reserve. Like there's more there. I can draw on more and I'm not going to exhaust it. Like there was a feeling before at some point I was exhausting my reserves and I couldn't quite go back in the bank account and it was like, oh wait, I thought I had $100, but I only got like $10 left. I better just be careful here. I don't feel that anymore. I feel way more depth of vitality. So I guess you would probably associate that with like, I feel like there's more potential for longevity and quality of life.
Yeah.
And it's just in my bones, dude. It's just like, it's not something I can point to. It's just a primordial instinct.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just like obviously you have a lot of noticeable benefits, but there's obviously a lot of benefits that you wouldn't be able to necessarily know or describe as well. But you can feel from the inside that it's just doing so many different things and bringing to a point of like homeostasis. Like
Homeostasis.
fully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel more human.
Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah,
Does that
for
make
sure.
sense?
Yeah, because you said grounded, because you were saying earlier, like, and this is what I experienced a lot of people, you can get vegan, your nervous system become very exposed, very ungrounded, you're very up here, and you think you're so spiritual, and like, yeah, it's a type of spirituality, but it's so ungrounded and so unbalanced in so many different ways. It's just not the most balanced type of spiritual self that you
It's a
could
very
have with
like
yourself.
you start getting these abstract concepts and you're in your head a lot and it's kind of disembodied, and I think that's actually how people get mind controlled. I think that's how people get very fooled. David Wolfe told me many years ago, he said that if you only have 4 minerals in your diet, you're easily fooled, but somebody with 90 plus minerals in their diet cannot be fooled or mind controlled. And I was like, oh man, that makes a lot of sense, because whether I was getting the minerals or not, I'm sure I was. I felt good, but now I feel, I always had that kind of discernment. I never played into any kind of BS, especially stuff going on right now with all the fear pandemic, scandemic stuff, like all the fear that's being projected on people. But I can tell you, the timing of me putting the animal foods in my body was right before March. So like was early February. So this thing's kicking
Uh-huh.
on, right? All of a sudden, this primal instinct kicks on inside of me. This warrior discernment kicks on, and all of a sudden, I'm able to better tell falsehood from truth. And it's not like I don't have to think about it. I'm like, no, that dude's lying. Like, that's not like, what do you, and they're like, well, you need studies and where's your proof? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, dude, can you not tell that this is nonsense? It's like that kind of intelligence, and it's bodily instinct, where I realize a lot of people are so in their head, they actually are not connected. So they have like sense making. They're very like, a lot of people are very intellectually brilliant, but they don't have any instinct. So they're
Yeah. Oh,
easily kind of taken on these rabbit holes that it's like a doctor who's put on who's like a very brilliant, very intentional person, but he's been traumatized through so much academic schooling. They put him on all the wrong information, and now he becomes a rep for the pharmaceutical company when his real intention was to heal. He should have been doing naturopathic medicine. You see what I'm saying? But he wasn't connected to his instinct, so he couldn't tell the difference.
yeah, and that is what goes on in the vegan movement. It's a great analogy for the vegan movement. It does. So many people are so in their head, so disconnected from their gut instinct, from their body, and so many people need to get within their body. And most people on, not everyone, but a lot of people on vegan diets tend to get disconnected from their body. It sounds like you did, and like just so many people out there. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
I really feel like, and again, like, obviously this isn't, again, as I mentioned, this isn't the easiest thing to try to break down. I haven't exactly refined all of my thoughts to a T yet. So, I appreciate you and I appreciate the audience kind of entertaining this train of thought. And I hope it's coming out coherently,
Yeah.
everything. But there is this weird transhumanism kind of energy that sometimes plays into, and I have friends that are long-term and very influential vegans on social media, and one of my friends, who I won't mention his name, but he's pretty well known, he's one of my best friends, and he was one of the first people I talked to about this. Didn't blink an eye. He just listened to me. He's like, dude, I love you no matter what, man. And we agreed on one thing. We agreed that agriculture was the problem, not
Yeah.
plants or not animals. We agreed that agriculture and industrial agriculture was actually the problem, that we're all trying to solve, or at least we're pointing to. And I actually showed him some of these articles, these rethinking veganism, because that's kind of my the title of this message and kind of a wave of information that I want to start presenting under the title of Rethinking Veganism. And he was the first person I sent these articles to because I wanted to know how it landed for him, right? Because he's vegan. I was kind of like, I don't know, like, I know how I feel about this, but I know, like, I'm not as good as Donald Trump at taking 1,000 like blow darts all at once. Like, so, you know, I was a little like, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack, but I just want to know if this feels honest. And he's like, this feels really like, I agree with what you're trying to say. And, you know, like, more power to you. And that felt really good, you know. So there is this kind of like, for me, this isn't about veganism, but this is also, veganism just happens to be the term that I feel like is being used as a way to project certain ideas that really, I mean, quite honestly, are really potentially dangerous, and play into this transhumanistic, like, processed pet food kind of reality that a lot of people are going into.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like what you're saying. It's like if you look at normal doctors, what they say, saturated fat is bad, cholesterol's bad, have more fiber. It's very in line with the vegan agenda and the push for like lab-grown meats and vegan plant-based foods that are promoted by so many different corporate companies that are destroying the planet. And it's like, it just sounds like you started to push. You've really started to go really deep into all this stuff. Like, I haven't heard many other people talk about what you're talking about, but it's very important for people to be aware of all of this for sure. So when you say you eat a modified carnivore diet, like what type of animal foods have you tried since eating animal foods, and what does your diet look like exactly for anyone who wants to know?
Yeah, so right now it primarily looks like right now I'm doing a lot of bison. I feel like that's my favorite. That feels like the most closest to a wild kind of, you know, virile animal. So as much access as I have to like bison ribeye and flank steak and and things like that, and then bison burgers, but all just without, like, no plant and animal food together. It's all like it's just like animal meat by itself, which I think is a very important thing, right? Our pH, our digestive pH has to be at 2.0 or lower in order to actually properly process the animal foods. I think that's where when you have the bun and you have all these other weird things, that's when you have these digestive conflicts. And so I don't do any of that. I do everything by itself. And all the solid food is pretty much animal-based food. So I haven't had a salad in 3 months, which is crazy because I had at least one salad every day for almost a decade, and I loved my salads. By the way, I loved my salad. I had the best salads ever. But I just haven't felt, it's just not part of my restructuring process right now. I do a lot of not a lot, but I do a good amount of ghee. I do eggs, duck eggs as much as I can, but chicken eggs on and off. And I'm doing that primarily for the egg yolk, and I feel like it does have an effect on my sexual glands, the testicles and the prostate and that kind of. That's where I feel it the most. That analogy with the eggs and the eggs. I feel like that is the realest thing ever. But I mean, the evidence is clear in my life.
Yeah, for sure. And without a doubt. And is there anything else? And have you? Is there anything else in the diet? And is there anything you experimented with animal food wise that you found you haven't got on with so well?
There's nothing. Well, let me just say this: I do as much organ meats as I can too. I like the nose to tail. I really, like that. I think that's an ancestral principle. Obviously, if we're going to eat animals, we don't want to be gluttonous. That's another thing. I have a challenge with the paleo community because it's like meat. It's like this, bodybuilder kind of like, kind of alpha male thing, but it's not really conscious, right? It's like, okay, well, let's remember this is an animal. It's a living creature. Like there's a, like what would be a sustainable approach to consuming animal products So, and what would be reverential? It's like, okay, well, I don't want to just throw away the organs. And I feel like for me, the organs are actually most of the time the most powerful thing, because I'm actually trying to rejuvenate my organs more than anything. My muscles are fine. My muscles are good, but it's like the kidneys and the adrenals and the liver and maybe the gallbladder that I'm trying to really rejuvenate and rebuild. So, I've had heart a number of times, beef heart, bison heart, kidney a couple times, liver, right? Liver's pretty common. I've been doing desiccated organ, freeze-dried organ capsules when I can't get, from ancestral supplements. I can't get certain other things all the time. So I'll definitely always have the liver on hand, because I feel the energy boost from the desiccated liver capsules. The kidney capsules. I mean, it's amazing. Think about it. It's amazing that we even have access to that. Like, if somebody just wanted to be like pseudo-vegetarian, like, I'd say just do the desiccated organ capsules. Like, that would have made a massive difference.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's something that I'd probably end up recommending that too. For example, a lot of people have to do desiccated pig thyroid for their thyroid if they've had part of it removed, or they're getting off the medication. I know a lot of vegans that had to do that just because they had thyroid medication problems. So that's not like a really like far out idea, right? That's something I think everybody could sit with. So I do that. And then I do some plant-based things. I'm not eating any solid plant-based foods. I do one green shake every day with just a mix of like kamut grass and alfalfa grass, like grass powders. That feels really good, and it's very cooling, especially in the summer. I'm in Arizona right now, so that feels really good. I do medicinal mushroom teas, like adaptogenic teas, herbal teas, and I am doing a type of amino acid supplement it's a fermented vegan amino acid supplement, but it's just the pure amino acids that go right into the bloodstream within about 20 minutes. And those are amazing. So that, in combination with the animal foods, I feel like that's like I found my balance point for now. Yeah. We'll see what the next 3 months are. I figure for me, it's going to be some kind of integration, probably an 80-20 kind of thing, because I do know that, plants tend to have plant toxins. They tend to have these built-in toxins into them. So I think I'm probably also going through some kind of detox of oxalates and
yes,
kind of thing. I didn't have any full-on like flu symptoms like some people talk about, but little creakiness in the joints here and there. So it's like, okay, maybe but it kind of comes and goes. So I feel like that could probably be some kind of detox there.
Yeah, and it's really, really good to hear that you consume so many organs. Yeah, because obviously they're one of the most nutrient dense whole foods as a true superfood. Yeah, it's really, really good. So yeah, before we end the interview, is there anything else that you think would be important to share with the audience that you haven't already?
I mean, like just keeping an open mind, like there's so many things in life that are so much more important than diet ideology. And by the way, the word diet has the word die in it.
Yeah.
It's like we really got to start thinking about our reality, rethinking reality, right? And it's very easy to get so myopically focused and obsessed about something it's not trivial, but it's only one part of a much bigger picture. Like your food assortment, it's going to change. Like as you evolve and change, as we evolve and change as people, our lifestyle is going to change. We're going to experiment with different things. Certain things are going to work at some point. Some they're not going to work at another point. We got to change and adjust. Life is fluid and consciousness is fluid. And I feel like people that aren't that when their diet stays the same, they tend to be staying the same too. They become very rigid, very tightly bound to some kind of identity. And the last thing I'll say, my perspective on health is that your health is an intimate connection with you and your body and you and your mind, you and your heart, your spirituality. Nobody has the right to infringe upon that. Only we know what's going on with us. And this whole human experience is an experiment, man. It's all an experiment. And we all have a different karma. Somebody might do really well on a vegan diet because they might have been a monk in the past life. I know some people think that's completely ridiculous, but I've gone deep enough into that where I realize that that's a valid perspective, because I know that there's people I know who are pulling off very minimal food intake, and I know they're doing, I can feel it from them. I'm like, no, that's your jam. I know that, like, there's monks out there that can do things like melt ice with their mind. Like, there are people that can pull off a vegan diet. I get it. It's fine, right? But the exception doesn't make the rule. And that's the main thing. Like, there are different strokes for different folks. And I think the more we can accept that there's phenomenon in our world that is unexplainable, and that does relate to what works for us as a lifestyle and diet. It's a paradox, right? You know, so that's my message. I just really wish people would just stop bantering and complaining and attacking each other and actually band together, because we all have a shared fate on this planet. If we don't get our act together, it don't matter what diet camp you subscribe to, the whole food supply is going to be under attack, and everybody's going to be on some kind of pet food transhumanistic goopity gop. So, you know, we need to get our act together and start acting like, you know, human beings.
Yeah, so basically, like, what you're saying is, like, people need to keep their mind open to everything and attached to nothing.
That's it.
Like,
That's exactly
literally.
it.
And remember, everything is for always changing. Nothing is static. And what you're saying about people, how they are towards each other, we have enough separation in the world with so many different things. We need people coming together and creating more separation through diet and various other different things, and putting yourself in a box and not talking to certain people and hating on certain people due to what they believe. It's just causing more separation. We need more connection in the world. We need more love. We need more compassion, more empathy for anyone and everyone in all their given situation. You might not understand it. It might not gel with you. But as long as it's not affecting you in a negative way directly, who cares what other people are doing? Focus upon yourself, your loved ones, and let other people get on with their own journey. Yeah,
Agreed. Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to check out this guy's YouTube channel, he does have one, and some other social media platforms. There's coaching. You can check out his website as well. I'll put links down below for all of those. And yeah, thank you for joining us today, man.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, before you leave, everyone, don't forget to leave your comments and questions down below. If you're someone that's an ex-vegan that'd like to be interviewed, contact me. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your amazing day. Peace.